I'm Neil. I'm the founder of Enroute AI, and we are a software company that helps make transportation a little more efficient.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Kids in the Room podcast. Kids in the Room podcast.
That's right. That's right.
Brought to you by Move Faces TV.
Woo, all right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Kids in the Room podcast. Yeah, today we've got my friend Neil on the actual show. Neil, tell us who you are. Tell us what your specialty is. Yeah.
Thanks for having me on this show, Tavares. Guys, I'm Neil. I'm the founder of Enroute AI. And what we do is we build software for logistics. Think of it like you order something off of Amazon and it shows up at your door. What we do is how to make it show up at your door as efficiently and as on time as possible.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So wait, explain you're saying it shows up to your like what is the details into it? Like when you're explaining like the product, like how does it really work? Like you guys are like in the specialty of what, tracking goods or packaging? Like, can you break that down a little bit more?
Sure. From the time you order something, it passes through many steps. Like let's say the first step is the package is packed in a warehouse, let's say somewhere in Kansas. And then it travels to San Francisco over a road on a semi-truck. And once it arrives in San Francisco, it goes to like a local warehouse, which is where we come in. So what the best way is to send a truck from that local warehouse to your door and make sure that the truck's following the best route possible.
Now, when you say the best route, what does that mean, right?
Yes. So, for example, in Google, Google tells you the best way to go between A and B. But imagine a small van making deliveries. It has to go to 100 different stops in a day. And how do you decide which stop should I go to first, which one next, to make all my deliveries in the shortest possible time? Given that there are things like traffic, there are events that are going on, there's construction, there are delays. How do you account for all these factors and create like a sequence of stops for the day that ensure your packages are delivered on time?
Yeah, that's cool, but how do you do that? Like, how does it work? Like, how does that make sense? Like, explain it to, people who don't really understand what you're exactly saying. Cause it's like, there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's like, how do you optimize whichever route the best, that's more the most efficient way to do so, right? So like, how does that work? Like do you use like some type of special technology to do that? Algorithms, like what are you in? Yeah. Can you explain that? Yeah.
Sure. Yep. The secret sauce is in the algorithms. So mathematically, we try to model costs as like a variable. And the objective is to minimize the costs involved in all those deliveries, which roughly translates to minimize the number of miles that your truck has to drive. So it's a field in mathematics called combinatorial optimization, which is basically formulating a real world problem in a mathematical form and then having a solver solve it to give you a solution that translates to, like in this case, a sequence of stops that need to be done to make a route.
Wow, that sounds complicated. Yeah. All right. Yeah, definitely complicated. Yeah. So as you're I guess I want to ask, how did you, like, what encouraged you to start this? Like, what happened? Like, what were some of the steps in life that got you to be like, hey, I'm Neil, I'm gonna, create this thing, right? That's gonna allow more efficient route. I guess you would say connections, or how would you say that? I want to say it the right way and not butcher it. I don't want to butcher it.
Yeah, I think route optimization is a good term, or planning routes. To answer your question, how I got this way, I think ever since I was a kid, I've wanted to start a startup. I don't know what it was, but I guess it's because of my dad. He had his own business, whereas the rest of my family had jobs, which they had to basically go to at 9 o'clock, come back at 5, and then have the same routine every day. Whereas my dad had so much more flexibility, and it seemed like he always did things that he liked. And then
so it was like, basically you're saying like it was this the 9 to 5 grind that you saw other family members doing, but then you were just like, you were inspired by your dad, you were inspired by your father, because your father was already, you know, he was a figure, you know, growing up that inspired you to, you know, go ahead and build things or start your own things, right? Is that kind of what it was?
Yeah, I think the freedom aspect of it was big, but also getting to see that he actually builds things was encouraging, I would say. And then I think I got my first start in business, like many other kids. I think in high school, I was selling music CDs to my friends.
Who would have known?
Yes.
Was it Britney Spears? What was going on there, Neil? You know, did you have Britney Spears? It's
Anything
okay.
that they wanted.
Hit me, baby, one more time. Okay.
Yep. So, yep. I think that was pretty popular during that time.
Yeah, it was, right? Hit me, baby, one more time. Actually, you probably couldn't sing that song if you're a guy, you know? Hit me, baby, one more time. Like, it's kind of Me Too-ish. You get knocked out. I don't know.
But I think now that I think about it, games were probably more popular. So if you wanted a game, you couldn't go to GameStop. So I grew up in India. So you had to download it online. And then you had all these people who had wanted to play that game. And that was like a small business by itself. Maybe that was the start.
Wow. So that was like your first initial business.
I would say so. Not that it made a lot of money, but I think it gave me like, now that I look at it in hindsight.
That was kind of like your initial entry into, you know, building a business and, you know, thinking about things to scale. It kind of gave you the basic infrastructure to say, hey, look, I can build something. And it's like, yeah, I get it, man. It's cool. I've done the similar thing. I think my first business was like, for me, was elementary school, and it was a candy business that I started literally to help solve a problem for my friend who, you know, he wanted to, he wanted to date this person, right? Or this girl, right? And like, he never could date her. So I came up with the idea of like, how do we get her attention and how do we become the cool clique, you know? And I was new to the school, and I was like, hey, look, why don't we start a candy, a little business in school? And, you know, we didn't have any personal corporation set up, right? So there was no LLC, no Inc. It was just literally just us two, you know, just doing illegal things as kids, you know, but you don't know to set up a business license and stuff like that. And it wasn't that serious. We kind of wanted to do some lean things and test things before we actually did things like that. But actually, we didn't know about that at the time. But we started it. You know, he ended up dating that girl of his dreams after that. And that attention did immediately. It was like instantaneously. Within a week and a half, we were hanging out with a clique. That was a cool clique. And they were like, hey, they called us, said, hey, Tavares and Chaz, come over here, man. Hang out with us.
Now part of the club?
Yeah, we were part of the cool club.
Okay.
You know, I was always good at doing that. Yeah, switching things to become a part of the cool club and not, you know, yeah. But it wasn't originally cool because when you come to school, nobody knows you, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just like, who are you? Like, what are you here for? You know, but
you got to earn it some way.
Yeah, you got to own your stripes, you know. And until then, you're just like the lowest, you know, portion of the school, unless you just automatically look cool, you know. But I think I was a loner every time I initially came into schools, but then I just began to dominate and create my own different vibe, and so I broke a lot of the cycles or the structures and patterns culturally within schools, where I just hung out with everyone, you know, in any group, whether it was geek, nerd, you know, popular, jock. I hung out with everybody, rocker. You know, I was around everybody, you know, wrestlers, you know, I was around them, you know, and I wasn't really like, you know, set into this little cast, you know, and like people were just like, hey, what's up with this guy? Why's he breaking the rules? Yeah. You know, I was a rule breaker, man. I just didn't believe in like grouping things, tribal things. I believe in, you know, humanity.
Yep. I can see that.
Yeah. So it still resonates with me today. And, you know, maybe it's a little bit, you know, maybe it's a, you know, contribution to my DNA, man. Just different parts of my ancestry coming from all around the world and just like creating me. Right. And so maybe that's just like the inherent thing in me, but I don't know. But maybe it's just like something I was born with. Maybe it's not that. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. Let's talk more about you. So you were inspired by your father to create a business and things like that, and now where you're at is like you know, I don't know. Let me take a step back. Well, I think where I want to know is like, what inspired you to do this company, and how did you kind of get there? I got the point that you first started, you know, beginning the entrepreneurial journey when you were inspired by your father, but let's take it back to, okay, now you're at the company you are at now that you've created. Like, what were the steps to get you there? You know, and I'm saying back to school, you know, and things like that. Because was your father doing a computer industry business type, or what kind of industry was it? I don't know if I missed that or not.
I did not mention that, but yeah, he wasn't not into computers at all, and he was actually into construction. So it was when I meant build things, he was literally building things. So,
right,
yes.
It was the real deal.
Kind of, yes. But I think the reason I mentioned that is once you're exposed to this kind of entrepreneurial mindset from the beginning,
right?
Every time you work on something or you look at problems, there's a part of your mind that says, hey, I can build a solution towards it. And I think that's helped me a lot throughout my journey. So coming to your point of why I started this particular business. So just after school, so I came to the US in 2012 to study a master's in something called as operations research, which is applied math. And some of the problems that we're solving were in transportation, but sometimes even in the broader supply chain, transportation supply chain, which is kind of become cool now, but it wasn't as cool.
Yeah, it wasn't sexy at the time.
Correct.
Yeah, now it's like everybody's doing it in Silicon Valley. That's a new hot startup, is the whole transportation and routing type of information thing. And maybe it kind of sprouted off of like companies like, you know, Uber and Lyft, and then it kind of just switched over to like, how can we make, you know, the whole transportation, well, not really transportation, I guess, what would you say? It is transportation, but more like about, I guess you would say like, because like you have other competitors, right?
Yep.
In the field, and that would be like, you know, what was it? Is it like Port Flex or something like that?
Oh, the Flexport.
Flexport, yeah, I always forget their name.
Yep.
Yeah, like, and how would you differentiate your business from that?
Flexport, what we do is something called as a last mile. So like I mentioned, it comes to somewhere in San Francisco, and then from somewhere in San Francisco to your house in San Francisco. That's what we deal with. Whereas Flexport deals with some shipment that's coming from China to Los Angeles. How do you make that process more efficient or more transparent? That's what Flexport deals with. So it's mostly on the international freight container side of things.
So it's a total different problem they're tackling in a way?
Correct, yes.
Right, but there is some room for overlay for your company and theirs.
Correct. Maybe at a future time.
Right.
But as a startup, you need to focus. I think lack of focus kills more startups than, for example, competition. I think competition doesn't kill anyone, at least at this stage.
Right. I mean, competition is healthy because it kind of, you know, it empowers you to, you know, push on and, you know, motivates you to kind of do things differently. Correct. But I mean, like, okay, so right now what you guys are doing is, you guys raised a round?
Yes, we did raise a round about a month ago. We closed about $1 million. And that helps us build the product, find product market fit, go to where the customers are, scale our team, and so on. So it gives you immense flexibility to do stuff.
Right. What are some of the, like, to raise capital, what are some of the use cases that you're going to use this, you would use this money for? And like, how would even more money help you scale?
Well, I think it's a misconception that most people have, that more money is actually good. But it's not always the case, because you scale your team too quickly before you have a product that's ready for the customer, what they refer to as product market fit, you can end up spending too much money on the wrong problem. And then and then if you realize quickly and pivot, that's good. But if you do not realize, you end up having to spend all this money and not having revenues to show for.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. So you're just, you're being lean. You're only taking money when it's, needed.
Exactly.
And scaling that way, right?
Yes. So right now we, the way we are approaching it is as if we don't have much money. So continuing to be lean. And what we're trying to get to quickly is to figure out what customers actually need. So think of it like we are in the software business. So in the software business, the most effort actually is at the beginning. So you build the software once, and then the more customers you sell it to, the more money you make, because serving the software to one customer versus two customers isn't much different. If you have 100 customers, it's probably 2x the effort of having 1 or 2 customers. So it scales non-linearly, and the margins are really, really high. So as long as you find that product that many people want, then you're golden. I can hardly think of a software business that has this kind of product market fit and still needs money to grow or is not making too much money.
Right. So where do you want to kind of take the whole company? Like, are you trying to be, are you guys, hoping to be like $1 billion company somewhere down the line, or, like what is it? What is the end game?
I tend to not think of it in terms of money, because I think if you're doing this for the money, it's very demotivating, because it's a grind. It's a lot more work than most people can imagine. From what even I imagined, like the dream that I had, it's definitely not something that you can, like stories that you hear about someone starting something and becoming rich in 3 years, those are an exception rather than the norm. So to answer your question about what I want this company to become, I want to solve a real customer need. I want to make transportation much more efficient, more friendly to the environment. And in the process, of course, I'm running a business, so I need to make money. But I would say building a good product that customers need is first. And then because we are in the software business, money would take care of itself as a consequence of building great things.
Wow, this is great. So, as you I also want to also take a step back and, talk about like how your parents and, are, or family members are supporting you on this journey. Like, are they supportive, of you being a startup founder, quitting your job to build a company?
Absolutely not. At least they're getting used to the fact that I've now a startup founder. But if you think about startups, it's leaving your job to work on a startup or to start a startup is nothing new in the Silicon Valley. But the farther you go from Silicon Valley, it becomes less and less common for you to give up the comfort of like a big company job. And my parents grew up in India at a time where I would say it was still, there was a lot of socialism. And so you, like, let's say you wanted to buy a car, you can buy one of 2 cars. And so there were not many companies to work for. And the dream of every parent, I would say, in that age is for their kid to work for one of these big companies or the government. And doing your own business wasn't as cool. And because of that kind of mindset, they're not very comfortable with me leaving the comfort of like a full-time job to do something that's so risky. And also going back, like in India, you either grow up to be a engineer or a doctor, or at least that's what most people want their kids to do. And in my family, it wasn't even engineer or doctor. It was only doctors, because like if you look at my cousins, I have probably 15 cousins and 14 of them are doctors or something similar. And I'm kind of like the black sheep who wanted to be an engineer because I wanted to build things. So I'm trying to convince my parents, but I've realized that it's hard to convince them. But since I've raised money and I'm doing okay financially, they're not as worried as what they were before.
Yeah, that's interesting. What was it like growing up, in India versus, because America, I think is different, right?
Oh, yeah.
When you're like first generation here and things like that, or third generation, you forget about those things of that world, right? So for you, what's your take on that, growing up in India? Like, what was the variances of, growing up in India and then here and then traveling here? Because you now are, a citizen of some sense, right?
I would, immigration-wise, I think I'm not a citizen yet, but I've lived here long enough to know, like what the culture is. I would say so.
Right, you're a citizen to me. Anyways, just I just want to talk about the journey too, as well as like,
sure.
What was the variations for you growing up in India versus coming to America, and what was that like, and like what was that journey? Yeah, because does that make sense? Because like, I guess I'm saying like, for like some people, they might want to resonate with like, what is that journey like? Because a lot of people don't understand that. And I want to touch and make sure that other people aren't, understand what that journey is for you. Because some people have these misconceptions of like, oh, it was like this and it was like this. And this must be so perfect for you. And it has all these great amenities here. And, oh, wow, it must have been easy for you to come here. Or some people are like, oh, it's so hard. So like, what was that? What was that like? What would be the comparables, being growing up in India and then now coming here? And then what was that transition here?
Yep. India is growing rapidly, and it's becoming more and more like the West. But I remember growing up and like some things you take for granted in the US, you have to worry about in India. For example, you have electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But growing up, I remember there would be days where there's no electricity. Which was like you don't really get bothered by it because that's the way things are. Or there are days where you don't get running water in your house. It's much better now, but it used to be that way. Whereas when you come to the US, I haven't seen a blackout, electricity blackout in like a long time. So things like that you take for granted in the US, it's very different in India.
Yeah, I think that's pretty awesome. And then, how did you get over here? You got like an internship or like what happened?
When I came to the US to get a master's degree, and then ended up getting a job at a startup which was run by an MIT professor. And that professor would take his research in transportation and apply it to companies around the globe. And that's how I got exposed to a lot of problems in transportation, and also got to travel and see a lot of cool places. Wow,
that's crazy. So this was like, but were you seeking this, or it just kind of fell in your lap through it,
Yeah, so when I was when I was close to graduating, I did apply to a lot of jobs, and then I got a couple of jobs at these big companies, including one, I think here in San Jose. And there was this kind of email that our professor sent out saying that, hey, one of my colleagues who's at MIT is starting a startup and is looking for people who have like the skill in transportation and mathematics. And I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. I always wanted to do a startup. I do not know how to start one in the US, but maybe working for a startup will at least give me some kind of experience. And that's what I did. So I turned down the other offers and moved to Boston to work for him.
Wow. So would you say your journey was kind of like a recommendation, and then that's how you it's kind of how you got into,
yes.
Yeah.
I would say so.
Isn't that wild? Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. Do you believe in destiny, or do you believe in, life is just sporadic?
I do believe in serendipity a lot. Destiny, I think, the way I was brought up, We do believe a lot in destiny and karma in India, but I think there is a little bit of that, but I think you can control your destiny to a large extent. Like you work hard, you probably will get things.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's kind of karma.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally, man. But so I guess I want to also ask too as well, like, you were growing up, in India, you came here, you kind of got in this trajectory of this internship and it was kind of recommended and you got into this whole thing and now you're here building a company, right? And you raised millions of dollars. And it's like, I think we had talked, offline, previously, and it was just like, I think we were talking about like, confidence and, going out there to sell yourself and, be presentable. And it's like, how do you feel like, I don't know, like, how do you feel like the way you were growing up contributed to, this whole, like, I don't know, I guess, I mean, like culturally wise, like in the United States, it's kind of, you're kind of pushed to be more resilient, outgoing in a way, or you just kind of die, right? I mean, not everybody is that way, but you're kind of pushed to be that way because just like how society is. And I know we spoke and, you always, were transparent. I was like, hey, look, I'm just not that. I've never been in the past that really outgoing person. And, you've been kind of rather reserved and just introverted at some point. And it's just like, but wait a minute here. You're an introvert, but you raised $1 million. Isn't that almost like a contradiction of your, presence and the reality? It's like, wow, isn't that amazing? Like to even think that, like, where do you think that comes from? Like, how did that start? Like, do you think that's a cultural thing growing up back in India, or what? Or is it like a family thing? What's your opinion?
I would say my mom's actually a professor, so she's way more extroverted than me. She talks to people all the time. But the culture generally in India is you basically listen to people rather than be more outgoing. Like I'm amazed, like kids here in the US, they speak so well and confidently. You don't have that kind of culture growing up. You're supposed to listen to your elders and do as they say and so on. So I think part of it was how I grew up. Part of it is being like a techie or an engineer, where you go to your corner and work on something, and you don't really interact with people. And when I started this business, my idea of a startup was, to put it simply, you build and they would come. So you build a great product and somehow customers will find you, like beat a path to your door. And I couldn't be more wrong than that. So I've been, like startups are a lot of learning. And one of the learnings was, it's not enough. It's not enough to have just a product. You also need to sell your product. And I've been trying to be more outgoing, reach out to more people. Networking is another big thing. I don't think it's stressed enough in school, but networking is probably a very, very big aspect, both in terms of sales and in raising money. And to answer your question about how I ended up raising money, it was basically through networking. So I was at an event where I actually met an investor who happened to have invested in another logistics related software company, and he was excited about what I was doing. And he's like, oh, this sounds interesting. I can write you a check if you're raising money. I was like, okay. And then he introduced me to his friends who wrote checks, and they introduced me to their friends who wrote checks. And then before I knew it, it was like $1 million. So I would stress that networking is a big part of running a startup. The more connections you have, the more people who you interact with, kind of serendipity happens.
Right. Yeah. And would you say also as well as like were there any similarities to the people that you were networking with? Like, did they have any, similar attributes as you, or maybe some of them may have been connected to, back home in India, or they had cousins or relatives that might have lived near you, or was it just like randomness, of just like some guy from London, who just like wanted to invest in your company, or some guy sitting over here from Silicon Valley who just said, hey, here's some money. Was there any like of, you know, I guess I want to say like, was there any type of connection that you guys had, you know, that would help, you know, connect the dots?
I wouldn't say we had some kind of connection, like we both went to the same school or something. And I think that's...
Or maybe like their grandparents, or, you know, grew up in a town near you or something like that. Because, you know, sometimes you see that in Silicon Valley. Sometimes like, hey, man, I grew up in the same town. Okay, yeah, I'll support you because you grew up near my grandma. Like literally, you see things like that here. It's cool. But go ahead.
No, I mean, that's absolutely true. And I think that's one of the things that makes Silicon Valley special is... I think the willingness for people to bet on ideas and to trust people that they're meeting for the first time. I think the connection that I had with our first investor is that we both went to University of Michigan. So that helped, I'm guessing.
Right.
But I wouldn't be very surprised if he would have invested in me because I went to even if I went to a different school. I think it's more about them being founders themselves and resonating with the kind of journey at the very beginning. And a lot of people have told me this, starting a startup, the first few years till you figure out what to build is probably the best part of being a startup. And when investors like the ones that have invested invest, I think part of the reason is they want to relive those days because they get to hear what's going on, offer suggestions, and so on.
Right, they get to kind of live through you in a new generation, and they also get to make money from you too as well, because you know they're betting on you to win. You know.
Yes, definitely. I mean,
even though the probability you know most startups fail.
Correct.
Right.
Yep. I mean, that's a very good point. So here's the thing about probability. So that's a topic that's close to my heart. Many people think, oh, okay, 90% of the startups fail, or is that number close to 95%? But that's assuming that you're starting from nothing. What happens is as you build a startup and you learn things, your probability actually of success increases. So like a second-time founder is way more likely to build a successful startup if he has built a successful startup already. So it's not 90% the second time he starts it. The reason I mention this is it shouldn't be discouraging to people that, hey, I'm only going to succeed 5% of the time. You can actually increase those odds massively by going through this journey.
Wow. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, totally. I mean, because there is kind of like a recipe of like repetitively doing something and learning from those mistakes. And so you can rapidly iterate based off of your previous lessons that you might have learned. Like there is an art of, learning through experience and learning through failure. And once you learn those failures, you know, you can reflect on those and think how you could do it better. And then when you win some of those failures, you kind of know how to navigate it through faster because you reflect into, okay, I would have did this and that a little bit differently than I would have did previously, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a great point.
Right.
Yep.
So it just makes it easier, right? Like, but you know what's funny though? You don't have that many founders that are like your Elon Musk who just like continuously take these large risks and, you know, push, you know, the human culture on a significant out of our boundaries of what we typically think of doing, you know?
Yep. I mean, even if you look at Elon Musk, I don't think all the startups that he started, at least at the beginning, were successes. What was it? Like his first big success was X.com, which merged with PayPal. But he had startups before that, which we don't talk much about, but probably he learned a lot from.
Right. I mean, getting that one big solid win is it's your big catapult.
Exactly.
To, you know, leading you in a life of leverage.
Correct.
It totally is. But after that, he kind of,
yes.
He kept on, he kept on closely hitting home runs. But then you have founders like, you know, Zuckerberg, and it's like, what has he done since Facebook?
Correct.
You know, if you take him out of Facebook, I mean, do you really see Zuckerberg do anything magnificent again? Like, is he a one-trick pony? You know, or is he just like this chameleon who can consistently keep on making home runs like Elon Musk is? And I find that to be rare.
Yep.
Some people get lucky. And I'm not saying that, Zuckerberg hasn't had some solid wins prior to Facebook, but by all means, Facebook is his biggest idea.
Correct. Yeah, it's hard to say unless he starts something. Let's see what happens with Meta now. Maybe that will prove us both wrong.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it will. I think and I wonder, is it really proving us both really wrong in some sense, or is it just he poached the idea from other people? Because the metaverse is not new, right? The idea behind it has been around for years, probably before we were even born. So it's I think really right now we're at a point where we have the technology to leverage it and to really start building that initial framework and foundation. But other than that, it's I guess it's all the chemicals and the things that need to be right for this condition to exist, like life. We're all here right now. Those initial components are there, right?
Correct.
So it's water, soil, it's sunlight, those core elements, right?
Yep.
And it's I think that is where we are for the metaverse. But there is this big race for the metaverse for different companies who might want to jump into this. I've heard rumors about Apple. I think I forgot a couple of other companies too are interested into it too as well. But anyways, point taken. I think the metaverse is interesting. But I think,
for sure, yeah.
Is the metaverse in a way an escape from reality when we already can't deal with what's going on in real time, right? Imagine everybody just synced up to the metaverse. I think that's what a lot of people would love you to do. We're already synced up to TV. We're already synced up to our mobile devices. Now let's get them hooked on the metaverse. Let's push those dopamine, rushes in with the metaverse and get you addicted to sitting in your house in a room and never doing anything in life. And, we have universal basic income and you're never trying to create or, build anything new because you're just synced to the whole metaverse, right?
Yep, absolutely. I don't know how it'll play out, but I think there are a few use cases that are for which metaverse makes sense. But for many use cases that you see, it's basically catering to the attention economy where they try to monetize the time you're hooked up to the metaverse.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the thing is who do you trust with the metaverse? And I think of course, there's guys like Elon who don't bet on Zuckerberg being that person. I'm pretty sure there's other founders who don't bet on Zuckerberg because they've seen the abuse of how Facebook has kind of, manipulated the minds of the masses, which I understand. But I also think Facebook is, amazing thing. It's changed the world. It's changed the way how we communicate and connect, right?
Yeah, yep. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So it allows people to be connected. But on the other hand, it also spreads hate, for example, or the quality of your connections. You might be connected to 5,000 people, but they're all superficial. So you don't have the few deep connections that human beings really need.
Right. And then you have the algorithm trying to predict who you might want to speak to and what information you might want to see. And then they want to dump in with the advertisement model and, monetize off of you. And it's just hey, that's awesome. But I'm really here originally to connect with my friends and kind of keep up with them daily. And when you keep on, playing with the algorithm, you're kind of populating things that you guess that I want to see. And then you start, and there's another thing too. It's when you have, this is where I think diversity really matters, and I know a lot of companies, we say it's trending now to be diversity matters, but it's here's where I think diversity matters, right? When it comes to, having multiple types of personalities and building the product, for example, introverts, people from India, Mexico, Brazil, whatever, anywhere around the world, Africa, whatever, bring these all types of people and people from the United States all in here, introvert, extrovert, into the product space as much as possible. Because what ends up happening is you have certain people who have certain attributes and are not connected to the world, building products for the world, right?
Yep. But there's also this factor about Facebook's a public company. They're responsible for their shareholders, and what maximizes profits is probably deciding what the direction of which the product should be taken on. Yeah.
No, and I agree with that totally, and I understand that, right?
Yep.
I've worked at Meta before, so I get it. But at the same point, I think what I'm saying is there begins to be a way. There's more than one way to execute.
Yep.
And when your personality is driven based off of where you were raised, who you associate with, and you close that off, right? And then you say, I'm going to give my opinion on how this direction, this product is going to be built. You're putting that down for the entire world, a group of people who just all kind of think alike. You know, it's like, you know, it begins to be kind of like a culty in a way. And it's just like, it also closes minds because everybody's not thinking different. And then it allows disruption to sneak in because everybody's thinking the same. A lot of people are introverted. A lot of people are, you know, copying and mimicking. I mean, typically you know, what I've seen people like, you know, inside of, you know, Facebook where everybody's trying to talk like, especially higher ups, try to talk like Mark Zuckerberg. And I'm like, am I talking to you or am I talking to Zuck? Like you guys are like miniature Zuckies. And it's like, you know, and then even got to get a girlfriend just like Zuck, you know, like you typically see that. And, you know, our startups, and especially when you go to certain companies, you see like a mismatching of the CEO's culture. Yeah. And people tend to copy and paste those things instead of being their own original self. It's kind of a human attribute. It's to kind of like copy and paste what they see around them. So I don't know. Maybe that's often a little rant, but I'm just saying in general, I believe diversity matters so much. And not just a Silicon Valley blanket diversity, because I think what we say in Silicon Valley is diversity is not really thinking about this diversity in a whole, right? We have people who are building products who are kind of clicking in groups and only knowing and only associating with those. And they have different personality traits, which is not bad, but you need a mixture of different ones, I feel, not because, you know, somebody didn't earn it or these other things like that. I feel like we just need different opinions when we're building these things. And I get we can get feedback through user research, but it's different because we're going to actually make those calls internally overall.
Yep.
And it's like how that algorithm is built is built off of the product people, and they can suggest the direction they feel like they should go, you know? And then when it comes to creating new ideas and things like that, I guess what I'm saying is if these companies already have the best people, then why are they buying and acquiring new companies consistently?
It's a good question. Probably there are many factors, I think. One is to show growth. Like Instagram was like a good case for this. Or WhatsApp, another.
Well, I agree.
Yes.
To show growth. But I guess what I'm saying is, so for example, like you go to a lot of companies and a lot of companies will say, in order to be a senior this, or at a L this, whatever level it is, a pay grade or how well they think you're able to accomplish the goal that they need to achieve. They will rate you based off of your interviewing skills and then put you in those positions based off of that. But they're not actually practical because if you look at the whole scope, you got guys like, you know, Kevin Systrom of Instagram. Would he have passed some of those initial tests to be in product and to get to those high levels?
Absolutely not.
Right. Yeah. So how can you tell someone that this is the bar for quality in design thinking or building products or engineering when a lot of these people couldn't have passed the initial test?
Yeah, I think hiring is a very big challenge because like if you're hiring one or two people, you can get to know them, spend time with them and figure out who they really are. But how do you hire 1,000 person team where you have to be consistent and repeatable? I think all these are shortcuts, which leads to a lot of gatekeeping, I would say. And for example, lead code. I know people have opinions, but I would say if lead code was a way to enter my company, probably I wouldn't have made it through that test. And I don't even know if lead code is the kind of skills that you use on a day-to-day basis. But I mean, it might show other things, like, for example, how persistent you are or how hardworking you are to spend time after your work to practice these problems, which could be like good skills to have on your team.
I agree, but then there's so many diversities when it comes to personalities that are not brought into there. For example, introverts.
Yep.
Introverts typically, I think, do well in engineering, right? You know, I have a really introverted personality types. You know, you might not notice them as much.
Yeah, it doesn't seem obvious.
But you know, I've had to train myself to that. I had to train myself to be that person. You know, I had to train it. You know, my mom said, you know, hey, a closed mouth is a mouth unfed. So I've had to learn how to reverse engineer myself.
Got it.
Right? By challenging myself and being outspoken and being confident in what I'm saying and speaking. And then sometimes fucking up, making mistakes, going out there, doing things that don't scale, doing all those fundamental practices, before Paul Graham even, made them public, I was doing them, so it's like, these are the things that I'm creating frameworks on when it comes to being myself and my human needs. And maybe I can pass it on to other people and inspire them. That's the goal. Yeah. But I'm just saying in general is like, I don't know. I think like when we're thinking about, hiring processes and we're thinking about figuring out how to, hire to scale, this is where diversity kicks in, man. Because we need to understand introverts. If you have designers are most of the time not considered, they're not delightful to be considered as quality if they are introverted, because you're known to have good communication skills and you need to follow this framework or you're not a good designer.
Yep.
But again, here's where it gets really loopy and here's where it gets inconsistent. How many of these original founders of WhatsApp, Instagram, Dropbox, Airbnb would be considered or hired by any of these top tier companies, or even some of the companies that are FAANG now? I would say, and I would bet, most of them fucking wouldn't.
Yeah, I would agree.
So then we have to revisit, what the hell are these, what are these entry level, gatekeeper processes that we're building out? And are we getting quality? Because obviously we're not, it's broken. The hiring process is broken, because if it wasn't, then guess what? We wouldn't be acquiring billion-dollar companies, because we would have these L8s and 6 or whatever levels you want to have internally at your company. We would have these people building these products.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. There might be some, other things like politics internally and, being able to have the power to drive something to change the whole product cycle. There's those overlays of that, the whole levels. But overall, like in general, I would say still, why aren't the highest quality of those people in product inventing these new things?
Yeah, a good question.
And if they're so skilled, why can't they just go leave and build their own freaking company?
Yeah. Building your own company is not just like building a product. It's so many other things. Like we talked about, like selling, for example, is a big thing. Like raising money is another big thing. And trying to do it all by yourself is very intimidating, I would say. And it's also, I think the reason why many young people start companies, because they do not know how hard it is, which is very good.
Ignorance is bliss, right? Okay.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes. Coming back to levels within companies, I think those are, if a L level 2, I haven't worked in a big company myself, but if I understand correctly, if you're at a certain level, you're supposed to be working on a certain kind of problem. But what happens in a startup is very different. If you're good at it, you can probably do anything you like, irrespective of the level. And I also believe, this is just my personal opinion, that all these levels are created within companies as a sort of gamification. If you look at all these other companies, the way they get your attention is by gamifying things. So I think levels are a way to do that and retain people internally. If you stick around another 3 months, now good luck, you unlocked level number 6 and so on. Which I think is bad for companies, but once you reach a certain size, I can't think of a better way to do this.
Yeah, I see that too. I see the gamification to it. But I've even talked to, being in the interviewing space, I've even talked to other recruiters and things like that. And they'll tell you like, oh, I will break down the fundamentals, because, I'm a problem solver. Mm-hmm. So I will tell you, I was like, hey, look, this doesn't make sense, because I could learn how to be amazing at, interviews, but not be great at actually executing. Yeah. Right. I could be also a sprinter versus a marathon runner when it comes to building products.
Yep.
Some people, so if you tell me, hey, look, you've got 45 minutes to show me that you can build a great product and you have a great framework. That's not reality in building a real company. Oh, well, we want to see how you collaborate. I don't know you.
Yeah.
Tell an introvert to work with somebody else that they don't know and like see how it works. And then there's also chemistry of the personality traits. There's a lot of red flags and false signals with these processes, and they're broken. And I think we just copy and paste these things and say, oh, well, this is how we level somebody else. You know, and then what happens is investors end up copy and pasting. Oh, if you worked at this company, then you obviously know how to do the job.
Correct.
But you didn't work at those companies, and you obviously know how to do the job.
Yep.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
This is where it begins to be dangerous.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
We begin to discriminate without knowing that we're discriminating. Because if those blockers were right and you listened to them, right, and you weren't resilient, you would not be where you are.
Correct. Yep. Now it's interesting that you mentioned even investors, because the way investors decide to invest or no is usually through creating a pitch deck and you making a presentation and talking about big numbers and stuff, which I really think, at least at very early stages, makes no sense whatsoever. And the reason is, if you knew what exactly you're building and you have a plan to scale, then you don't really need money. You can build it yourself. The truth is that startups have no clue what the customer needs, and it's a constant process of iterating, reiterating, pivoting, and so on. So I think the exercise of you pitching to investors tests more of your storytelling and your presentation skills rather than your actual ability to build product.
Right, and I totally agree on that. But sometimes your ability with storytelling may suck, but you might be an amazing fucking person to build an amazing company.
Yeah, right? It is possible.
Right? Like, I mean, do you really, I mean, like, honestly, you know, I'm pretty sure Elon Musk has built this courage. I'm not trying to talk about Elon Musk all the time, but I'm pretty sure he's built this courage to tell a story, but he initially didn't have that.
For sure, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I don't think people are born with these skills. It's learned over time. And as long as you keep trying and don't make the same mistakes, you'll get somewhere.
I mean, like, watch, Neil. Elon Musk, let's go back. I'm going to talk about him again. Just use him as a framework, right? We're going to use him for a framework, for an example. I like using him. So when he first started off, you know, building companies, before he started, you know, building companies, he was going into, I think it was Netscape or something like that. And he went into the offices, right? And when he, you know, when he went into these offices, he was just like, okay, you know, I'm going to get a job here, you know? I'm going to, you know, quit school. I'm going to get a job maybe at like Netscape or something else like that, right? I think that's kind of what the story kind of goes like. And when he goes into the lobby to, you know, see if he can get a job, he walks out because he's like, they probably would never hire me without even talking to anybody. This is fucking introverted as hell. He walks out and says, well, I guess I need to start a company.
Yeah.
How did he get to that freaking conclusion? Like, he didn't even talk to anybody. But this is an introverted personality type. And it's like, how do people like that get noticed? Because now he's not introverted as you would think, right? He's, you know, he's definitely more outgoing, but at the same time, his confidence has grown as he's built more success, and he's a popular person. So it's easy to speak when you have that presence and those wins behind you, right? You don't have to buy people's favor, right? People already have some favoritism towards you already now because you're the hero. It's like, oh, anything you do touches a goal. So now you're a winner. It's easy point to be that guy then.
Yeah. But he's gone through hard times to get here for sure.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But he's done it within, I would say, scalable levels, right?
Yeah.
You know, he's done things within reason. You know, he didn't jump out there and say, I'm going to build Tesla for his first startup. He scaled properly. He started off with, you know, the company that merged in with PayPal that you spoke about earlier. And then that gave him enough money to, or engine or push or power to actually go ahead and, you know, invest in, you know, Tesla, you know, the other, what is it? The satellite company, SpaceX, but the other, what's the other one that he does? He does like, satellite
company.
No, it's not the Boring Company. He does another one.
SpaceX launches satellites. What's it called? Starlink.
No, yeah, Starlink. And then there's also, what is the other one? There's also another one they do for like solar power, Solar City or something like that.
City, yeah.
Or something like that, yeah.
His cousin's company.
Right. So it's like, you know, but I think he obviously has his little hands in that one. But you get my point. But now he's been able to spread himself out thin. I think a lot of people think like, oh, well, I don't want to say spread himself out thin. What people will typically think as spreading themselves out thin. But I would say he's not really spreading himself out thin once you've already reached enough quality, you know, within the companies and you've hired the right people. You can do more things, right, to scale. But at first, you can't do that. Your first initial companies of success.
Yes. Yeah, I think people start out with, I need to build $1 billion company. I think you should cut your teeth at building like a $1,000 company first and then move up to 100,000 and then you'll reach billion someday. but it's very, very unlikely that you can start a $1 billion company on your first go. There's so much to learn. It's like drinking out of a fire hose.
Yeah, there's so much to fail. There's so much to learn. And it's like, and everybody has their own time of success.
Correct, yes.
Right? There's no like, I think everybody always tries to rush. Oh, my friend's doing that and I should be doing this. And I feel like one thing when I first came to Silicon Valley, I felt like, everybody was trying to build a company.
Correct.
And it was like, are you even a person to build a company? Like, is that in your nature? Is that who you are? Like, I feel like me and you have it like kind of in our DNA. We're just like we're just that, outgoing, let's build something, let's solve a problem. Let's not wait for people. Let's do it. So we're always looking for that opportunity to build something and to help people and humanity. And that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think, that's a danger, I think. But it's a good problem to have where more people are starting companies because the market forces will filter people who build good products versus not have good products. But I agree. Like a lot of people start companies for the wrong reasons. One of them is it'll look good on my resume. I don't encourage people to start a company because it'll look good on your resume. It's way too hard.
I mean, Facebook movie kind of pushed that,
Yeah.
Once that Facebook movie came out, it just birthed a bunch of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, which is okay, I think.
I don't know. I don't think it's okay. And I'll tell you why I think it's not okay. I'll give you my opinion.
Okay.
I think it just made I think it made our space noisy. You got a bunch of entrepreneurs out here trying to build stuff. And so when you're trying to raise capital, everybody thinks you're the entrepreneur. Unless you prove them through some amazing metric or you have some type of connection other than that. But I think right now where we're at is it kind of filtered itself out to where there's not many people starting companies like it used to be. Now everybody's like, oh, let me get a job at Google.
Yeah.
Not that Google's bad, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, with that kind of pay, I would be tempted.
Yeah, it's great perks. It's easy to get you caught in. And that's also where I wanted to also talk about, all right, cool, because it's like, we talked about like hiring processes and best practices that may go wrong and that probably aren't built in a scalable and a logical way, right? And more efficient. But if you think of things of, what was that? The pay. Mm-hmm. I feel like the pay is more of a gamification. And that's one thing that I always get scared about is like when I'm working at bigger orgs, it's like they pay you so well, they make it hard for you to leave and take that risk.
Yeah, I mean, they're good at keeping users on their platform. They should be good at keeping engineers in their companies.
Yeah, that's true. It's the gamification of that.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know. I spoke to one person. We were just talking about hiring practices and things like that. And I think like the one person was like, hey, you shouldn't gamify the process. I'm like, but it's all a game.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, one of my friends, I told him he was working at another top org. And he was like, a senior engineer. And I was like, hey, man. And he was like, hey, I really want to get, to maybe a higher position, but it's going to take me a long time. I was like, man, just go build your own startup, dude. And you'll make way more than what you're doing right now. And you'll learn a bunch of cool things. And maybe if you fail, and you can always go back with that new experience and they're going to, ramp you up like that. And he was like, yeah, man, I don't know. I need to get by the fourth year, I'm going to get this much money. And if, he's going to reach all these type of caps that are going to, pay him handsomely. So he didn't want to do that, but he ended up doing it. And now a lot of the same companies that wouldn't even rated him as this top level person came back to him with an offer after a year of working in this other startup. And it's going moderately decent. They raised a lot of money and now they're offering him VP position.
Okay.
Without even going through the test.
Yep.
So what is the point of the test? Like what happened to him and what skills and knowledge did he gain immediately by jumping off the train?
Yeah. I don't know, man.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like he just switched. He said, oh, I'm going to quit and I'm going to do it myself. And now he's automatically, within a year to this higher position he would have never got if he stayed internally.
Makes sense. Yeah. But you mentioned like how Elon Musk went into the office and decided that's not for me. I think there's a part of me at least that cannot work in a big company. So the MIT professor's company got acquired by another big firm. And then at that point, I was like, okay, this culture is not really for me. I can't put my finger on what exactly it was, but starting a company just to go back to another company, I don't think once you get a taste of working on a startup, you can go and work for a big company. I at least think of it as like a one-way street.
Yeah, I agree with you. Unless you don't have another startup. to do it in,
Correct.
because then you have to fucking survive. So it's
Correct.
like, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
You know?
definitely there.
And you have to
if you're
find that
forced to do it,
Right.
yes, you have to do it. But
Yeah.
given a choice, yeah, it's really hard for me to go back.
Yeah.
To the other way.
Because you're
of doing
doing good.
things.
You're doing good. Yeah.
I wouldn't say so. I think I'm trying to figure things out. But the journey itself, it's very exciting. The kind of things you learn, I would say like the networking, the kind of people you meet, the kind of advice you get. And there's something magical where I think when you're trying really hard to do something, people are more willing to help you. The kind of advice that I get, I wouldn't have got that working for another company. People try to mentor you. I think people are very kind.
Yeah, but you know what though? People are very kind. But you know what? You have one thing on your side. Money. You don't have a lot, but that money gives you runway, right?
Yes, for
and
sure.
that gives you time to think about your next moves.
For sure. I don't discount that.
And you're also an engineer.
Yes. Having the ability to code things or build things yourself is definitely a plus. And having money in the bank, I won't, even though I don't want to say it's big, it is a big factor. It gives you so much, so many options. Like you can take your time and figure what people really want, rather than trying to always optimize for getting that extra dollar.
Yeah, the extra dollar. Man, we live by the dollar, slave to the dollar. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I get it too, totally. And I agree with you 100%. I don't know. I just think, I don't know. It's a touchy point, but money matters. And I think a lot of people don't put that into account. A lot of successful startups could have been successful, but maybe that doesn't make them successful. But there could have been I feel there's a lot of startups that just needed a certain amount of money. And a lot of great startups died because they couldn't raise the money, whether it was too early or whatever it may be, you know, they didn't get it. So for me, I feel like money does matter with, you know, startup success. And the more you have to, you know, on your side, the easier I feel it is or it helps you execute the goal a lot easier and efficiently, because you're not worried about that. Oh, how much money do we have left?
Correct. I think there's some truth to it, but I'll give you a counterpoint. If money was a big factor in deciding success of companies, then the success rate of VC investments would be much, much larger than what we see today. Like even like take the top VCs, Andreessen or what's the other one? Benchmark Capital, Sequoia, or even like very early stage Y Combinator. Look at their success rates. They're in the single-digit percentages of making unicorns or something that's widely successful. So I don't think there's a very strong correlation between the amount of money you raise and being a unicorn. Because if money was like a big factor, then we should have seen their success rate. Like when they invest $100 million, that should have made many more companies unicorns.
And I agree with that. I don't want to sit there and set in stone that says money matters over everything.
Correct.
But I'm saying there's also other things that we're not putting into this whole output.
Yes.
Right? So it's like we can make these assumptions that money doesn't really matter. Then how come this person got $100 million? So how does so many of them fail? Well, there could be a numerous amount of factors that we're not adding into that output. And what some of those could be is who's investing in who and why.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, investors have,
you know,
startups.
People start investing. I've seen in Silicon Valley, people start investing really clicky. It's not everybody, but people do. Mm-hmm. What school did you go through? They start pattern matching. So when you start, Elizabeth Holmes? What was her name?
Yeah.
Like, how does she raise so much freaking money? Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, come on, man. Like, really, you guys gave her money. You guys threw money at her. And I don't know the whole, backstory. I saw some information about it, and, it really wasn't interesting to me, but to me, it was just like another person who got some easy money to be raised, and maybe it wasn't easy. I don't know, but I'm just saying, you start throwing money at people who, it's like, what is the reasoning behind that? Yep. $100 million for no product and nothing. But then there's so many other people who have products, who have possible ideas. I believe personally that it's just not a one size fits all output, right? I don't believe it's just like, well, hey, look, it's that simple. Hey, well, all these people have this much money. How come they didn't, become successful if that's the point? Is money was the only factor. I do not believe money is the only factor. Yeah. But I believe there's so many different other attributes of why those companies are failing. Yes. And it's just like not an easy one to kind of formulate. Yeah. But I would believe a big portion of it too is like this type of pattern matching that we do. And this is the same thing that I'm saying, explaining that happens in our hiring process at tech companies. We try to pattern match and create these frameworks to signal or output what we think is success, or most likely will have the highest probability of success. But that doesn't always output the same way.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, like Paul Graham says this in one of his essays, like the default outcome for anyone starting a startup is failure. And then it's going to be a series of lucky events that turns you from a failure to a success. So unless you get like a series of wins that happen very rarely, you don't get startups. And even if you look at it the other way, let's say you figure out factor A, B, and C are what causes successful startups, then it would be the same as people training to be like a dentist or an engineer. So you do A, B, and C, and then you build a successful startup. I don't think you can basically distill it down to a few factors. It's a bunch of serendipity, luck, hard work. It's a bunch of things. Money is definitely one of it.
Yeah, I see that 100%, and I agree with that. I just think like there's a format to it, but I believe if you don't have money, it just pushes the highest probability of it. And there's so many people who have ideas, but they can't even raise capital. But then there's so many people who have somewhat ideas, and they're just able to easily, raise capital. Everybody's not equally able to raise capital the same way, because there's a lot of pattern matching and things like that goes on in Silicon Valley. So you do see this influx of people raising a lot of money because people are typecasting and supporting, their groups and people who went to the same school and grew up in the same town, or, different little attributes like that, little tribalism things that go on in Silicon Valley. And you have some people just leveraging that, not just based off of those only, but those factors are added into there. If you went to Harvard, you went to Stanford, it's somewhat, you have a network where you can survive off of. If you have a similar background as some of the investors, we have, investors now that are like, hey, look, we want to support certain groups because they've been marginalized. But if certain amount of those groups that have been marginalized have, the investors are mostly fitting into that quarter, then obviously what's the output of more certain individuals raising more capital? Yep. Right? If more investors are thinking in tribal ways of like, this person reminds me superficially of myself, and because this is happening too. Like, don't believe that, that these things aren't happening. People are typecasting people like, oh, he reminds me of Zuckerberg. Let me give him some cash. Not just so easily like that, but you know what I mean? He's a grinder. He's, he wants to do something. Okay. He reminds me of Zuckerberg. Okay, cool. And whatever reminds him of that can also be physical. It doesn't always have to be you're this, you have this drive and these things like that. People literally typecast in somewhat when it comes to even investing. They'll have stereotypes attached to it. It happens the same way when you're doing like music. Certain groups, can be considered, oh, well, this person fits this category, so they can be a singer or they can be a rapper. But if another type of person from another background and group does that, it's like, yeah, I don't know. They could be good, but they have to be really good and really lucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, yes. I'm just saying these factors kind of kick in, because even when you're thinking about music people in the industry, record labels are basically, they're the same thing like, investors. Mm-hmm. They come in, give you some money, they say, take a portion of that and hope you do good.
Yeah, I don't know much about that industry, but from your description, it sounds about the same as investors.
I mean, it is, because you need money, mm-hmm. right? And distribution. Right? And connections and network. And this is what record labels provide you, different from yourself, unless you've built something on TikTok and these other social medias platforms by yourself. But even then, there's a lot of relationships that record labels have had for years that you still can't grab immediately.
Correct. Yeah, but I think the world's changing for the better, though. You just mentioned TikTok or Instagram. Those opportunities didn't exist. Like, if you wanted to reach 1 million or 1 billion people, how would you do that 30 years ago? That would be super hard. But now you have YouTube, you have Instagram, and there's one new social media craze that comes up every few years, and that allows you to reach a scale of audience that you couldn't imagine a couple of decades ago. And I would argue that that's the same even with startups and investors. I think Y Combinator changed the Valley for the good. It used to be like how you described, clicky and stuff, and Y Combinator here changed the rules of the game, made it.
I don't know. I mean, has Y Combinator? Y Combinator is a great company, by the way. A lot of great startups that came out there.
Yep.
But I mean, it also depends on the supply and demand of people and cultures that are interested into it as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm still saying, if you look at most of these startup, that you look at most of the background of most startup founders, they have a consistent pattern. You just do. And when you look at the most successful ones, they have a consistent pattern of who and where these founders came from. Right. So there's a danger in that, because what ends up happening is people just start investing in their own clicks.
Correct.
Right. And then these small micro clicks begin to be macro clicks. And then they have this buying power, and they end up supporting themselves. So it's community supporting inside themselves, instead of being, spread out and just, giving it to the, I would say that probably like people who are just as qualified and talented to do so. But, now there might be typecasting into that. But I do think YC and different companies like that do a great job. 500 Startup does amazing jobs too as well. Like plenty of others I'm probably not even mentioning. But I'm still saying there still is this inherent pattern matching that goes through raising capital that you see. I mean, I remember when I was in LA, there was a guy, me and my friends, we were raising capital for our first company. And this guy was like a rich kid, rich kid. He was just like, hey, I was like, hey, he's like, who's building this thing? I was like, yeah, well, I was developing at the time. I was like, yeah, I'm a developer, and I'm also working on the design, and I have another CTO. And he was like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. We can just get a bunch of Asian people or people from China to go work and build this for you. Don't worry about that. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? But there was a stereotype there. There was a stereotype, that he brought up. I mean, he didn't mention, Spanish speakers. He specifically, you know what I mean? Like, there's stereotypes that people attach, to certain demographics. And I'm saying those things they kind of like pour into people's judgment subconsciously.
Yep. I think unconsciously we all have our biases and stereotypes, which I think it's good that you bring it up. It's helpful to be reminded of all these unconscious biases that we have.
Yeah, I know, but I know a lot of people push back on them sometimes because they don't want to hear it. They're like, oh, and that doesn't exist. But really, if you're great and you're doing this, well, in order to be great, you had to get a chance.
Yeah.
Remember, we talked earlier about failure.
Correct.
So you have to get a chance to fail before you can actually be great. And somebody has to believe in you. Somebody has to take that risk. Somebody took a risk and gave you money. And then if we're talking about friends and family, not everybody can go grab their friends and family who can pull out a good, $200K or $100,000 or $50K or $20K and just say, here.
Yeah, that's true. But I would argue the other way as well, that you can, I think you can find ideas that that are not very capital intensive. And at least for software, the amount of capital that you actually need isn't actually much. It's all you need is a laptop and internet connection, and most people already have that. So I wouldn't like raising money is hard for sure. I don't want to discount that. And if you don't belong to those cliques like you described, it's extra hard. But don't let that be like a factor preventing you from starting something, because you can always find an idea that doesn't need money. Not all ideas need investment or capital. And one thing I've noticed in investors is the biggest signal, even bigger than which school you went to or where you grew up, is a past success. So if you show that you can be successful at building something, or if you have even like a decent size exit, and you have the street cred, they're more likely to invest in you. Like if you're a successful first-time founder, raising your second round is so much easier.
No, I totally agree with you. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. But I think what I'm saying is you got to get there.
Yes.
Somebody's got to, somewhere you got to get a chance. You got to get a lucky break somewhere. I mean, unless it's just total luck, right? Mm-hmm. Like you just luckily just get it. But there's somewhere, everyone has some type of support, or there wouldn't be raising capital, or there wouldn't be mentorship. And I'm not saying that people can't go out there and find them and get them if they look really hard, but I'd just say like there's more of a probability of getting quality ones based off of some of these attributes that we stereotype in Silicon Valley or in Indian industry in general, not just in Silicon Valley, like they do in Hollywood with the music industry. You know, who can be rappers, you know, who can be singers, you know, there's stereotypes, you know, look at BTS, one of the biggest, you know, boy bands in the world, but would they pass being, you know, artists in the United States and getting signed? Probably freaking not.
Yeah.
Because they're stereotypes, but look what they've done.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I guess at the end is you can complain or you can do something.
No. And I agree. You can complain, you can do something, but at a certain point, when's complaining actual reality?
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
I mean, when the British came into India, you could say, oh, don't complain. Hold this up, do this, you know? Okay.
Yeah.
Stop complaining, just take it.
Yeah.
You can say it to an extent, that's complaining. But the reality is there's a limitation, or there's a small line between complaining and literally just, you know, things just blocking.
Yeah. No,
but I'm not saying that
agree.
But I'm not saying that people can't do it. And I would never encourage anybody from not doing it and doing things that don't scale and going out there and trying and you know, I would never, you know, bend down on a crutch and say, oh, or you didn't get this because of this, because of this. No, go out there and do something. Go out there and make something amazing.
Yeah. Because I think optimism is one of those factors that are very important when you start or run a startup.
But I think, like, you know, a lot of people might have this optimism, but I think the thing is, it can get shut down into reality. No matter how optimistic you are, if somebody says you can't get past this door because it's just who you are, it doesn't matter how optimistic you may be, eventually you're going to feel something else, right? Like, hey, what the hell's going on? And this is what I'm saying. And like, I'm sitting there, I'm directing to that, you know, when the British comes over to India and they're like, hey, you can't do this. You can say, I'm optimistic all day. We shall overcome. But the reality is, it's not changing. Civil rights movements in the United States, plenty of people were optimistic, but did that change everything to an extent? Slowly but surely, but still not even to the fact to where it should be.
Yeah.
So these are the factors I'm saying, that some things you cannot control, but you can only try to control within your grasp, and all you have to do is try. So I would say to anybody, you know, don't let anything hinder you. And I think things are changing for the best. And I think things are growing and we're learning from things. But I still think what my point is in general is that these things slip through the cracks. So I think what I'm relating that conversation to push back to is when we start thinking about, you know, how come so many startups have so much money and they didn't make it successful? Well, because there's probably a lot of pattern matching going on in there. I'm hooking my friend up. I'm hooking my cousin up, or I'm hooking up the guy who lived near me when I was a kid. Yeah, I believe in this person. You know, I'm giving him $100 million. You know, it sounds silly, but people tend to, you know, people are very tribal.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
You know, Neil reminds me of myself when I was younger. Yeah, I can give this guy some money. Yeah. You know, and I know that sounds silly to people, and I'm not saying it's just that easy, but some of these things do cross people's minds when they're giving them cash.
Yep. Yeah. I think where we are in Silicon Valley is much better than probably many other places.
Yeah, you know what? But you have that humility because you know that, right? And there's also frequencies and there's signals. Some signals might be more potent or prominent for some of us in Silicon Valley versus others, right? You know, if you're probably, you know, you don't see too many typical, I mean, commonly here in Silicon Valley, you don't know too many, let's say, for example, Spanish-speaking startup founders. How many of them do you know? Here in Silicon Valley, even though there's so many Spanish speakers in California, how many founders do you know that are like built their Airbnb or built their, you know, their Googles? It's just like, count them.
Yeah.
I don't know any. Now in Latin America, that's different. The frequency rises because that's just based off of numbers and metrics. But when you think about it, how many Spanish speakers exist in California, but based on, you know, but how many are actually even founders? There's a lot of different things that go into that, of course. You can't just say, oh, it's this black and white thing, but it's just like, you know, who's interested in the industry, who knows about it, cultural things. And then it's just like, then there's other things that come into play. It's like, do I notice this type of person building startups typically around here? Oh, why don't you go build something in Latin America? Because that's typically, you know, I mean, you'll hear things like that from investors sometimes. I've heard crazy stuff from investors before, and I've had friends that heard crazy stuff. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't even want to bring it out, but I know like one time there was a professor who told me and my friend, and he was actually he was also originally from India. And like we were sitting in one group, and at Stanford, and like the professor basically from this group, I'm not going to mention your name, basically said, you need a white founder if you want to raise capital. We were like, what? This is weird. Like, what's going on here? But this is literally what she said, and it was just awkward because we're like, what? That's not totally true. But that person learned that because they saw patterns, and they're in cliques, and so they know who knows money, because you're not in that industry, in that network, and you don't know how it kind of consistently be done. And they might be talking about something that happened in the past more, right? I think that's really what it was. And they weren't being malicious; they were just trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
They weren't knowing what they were saying, and this was a brown person themselves. So it's just like, what? But it wasn't. It just came from. I don't think it wasn't a place from malice, because this person's super nice. But it was just like that was what their experience and what they kind of saw.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
It is.
But enough about that. Yeah. I think like in general though, I don't want to put people into this whole realm where it's like, oh, these excuses and you can do this, blah blah. I just want to take. I wanted to take a couple minutes to kind of focus on like there are barriers for different people, and it's different, but you can make it anything you really want to do. But I just think some of it takes a little bit more of a challenge, because your network matters sometimes based off of your network.
Yes.
Right. Because there's cultural networks, and then there's networks that you can, gather through social events, right. And through success and wins. And you got to really put your best, effort forward, and, give it all you have. And I think you can break those windows, because there's a lot of new entrepreneurs that don't fit the typical mold, who are breaking in and who are getting funding. It's not this one type thing that it used to be prior. It is changing. But I'm just saying there's probably a lot of different people who haven't, and not everybody who may be stereotypically that type of person. Like, because I've heard people complain, how the corporate structure going to certain companies is certain types of people when they work there. So yeah, we're all getting in this tech company, but like how much of the leadership represents those people who are building the products?
Yep.
It gets really sticky when you start going to those things. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about something else that's a little bit more fun and not so deep. Oh, it's so deep. It's so fun. But I do think it's cool. But go out there, everybody, do your best job, build a company, be resilient. Don't let these things be excuses and be blockers. I'm totally not one for that, but I think it's just something that we all need to be cognizant of and reflect on as startup founders and as people who want to build things. We need to think different. And yeah, that's kind of it.
I agree.
Yeah. So what's next for you in the company?
Yeah. So coming back to the company.
Yeah. We got to go back.
Yes. So we are still in the process of finding what is that product that resonates most with customers. And the way you figure it out is by doing a bunch of proof of concepts. And we're doing talking to as many customers as we can, doing a lot of these proof of concepts and trying to figure out what we should be finally building. That's like the short-term thing. But the long-term thing, as I mentioned, is if we can make an actual change in logistics, make it more efficient, make it better for the drivers, make it cleaner, greener. I mean, that's like the big goal.
Yeah. Who inspired you to, in general, like in the startup industry? Who inspires you?
I think Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator.
Great guy, yeah.
I like his essays a lot. There's a lot of truth to them. I mean, there are a lot of people who say that he's from like a privileged background and he has things easy for him. I mean, there might be some of that, but I really think his advice resonates most with what I've seen in the actual startup journey. Many other founders are inspiring. You mentioned Flexport, Ryan Peterson. I think he's a great founder too. I was listening to his interview the other day. He's a nice guy as well. And like the funny thing is, where we are, either someone is a startup founder, has sold his startup, or is considering to start a startup. So you can learn a lot from a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Ryan, I watched that interview too. It was amazing. It was good. I enjoyed it. I like his story. He seems like an amazing guy.
Yeah.
Really great founder.
Yes.
Amazing journey too.
Yes. Like if you look at his background, even before he started this billion-dollar company, he was importing I think electric bikes from China, which is so far from like a real startup idea. It's like an import business. To what he's doing right now, like in the software space and making a dent in global logistics. Yeah, I'm sure he learned a lot along the way before he got here. And I would argue that he couldn't have started Flexport as his first company.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, is finding that opportunity to solve a problem.
Correct.
Like you can be this founder to do things and you can change things, you can build a company, but it's always about finding that idea, the right idea.
Okay.
And that comes to people at a different time.
Yes.
And I think Paul Graham, I think that, people get the stigma of like privilege. Privilege is a bad thing. I don't think privilege is sometimes a bad thing. I think everything has a pros and a con. Yep. Being underprivileged is, has a pro and a con, and being privileged has a pro and a con. It just depends on how you look at it. You always got to look at things more optimistic, which is what I'm saying, priorly to some of the conversation, to think of things optimistic. And sometimes, you might be comfortable being the underdog and just showing people what time it is. But other than that, I think Paul Graham, there is an amazing thing about him being privileged. And what do I think that is? Well, here's what it is. Paul Graham, has an insight about things.
Yeah.
If he is this so-called privileged, even though I don't really think he is, but I think he does have some privileges. Everybody has some privileges, right? Okay. And I think his insight and experience gives him a unique privilege. And so therefore we can't devalue privilege. I think the problem is now we use privilege in almost a dirty word. Like you can't have privilege, this privilege. Everybody has privilege, right? That's why I don't really like the word privilege. It's like everybody has some type of privilege. Yeah. It just weighs on the factors.
Yeah, I agree. You got to use every advantage you got.
Yeah. And that goes back into what I was saying earlier. There are privileges, advantages of, stereotypes. So if you on that good side of the stereotype privilege, then it's a privilege. Everybody has one. So it's like, you got to look at your positives and not focus on your negatives so much, and see if you can, uplift those as much as possible, but really try to stay focused and raise the bar. But Paul Graham's an amazing guy. I think what YC is doing is amazing too as well.
Correct.
But it doesn't hurt to have YC, on your startup stamp.
Correct. Yeah, it's like I would say a very good stamp of approval if you're YC approved.
Yeah, stamps of approval matter so much, I feel like, in the world, and I get it.
Yeah, I mean it's like a tag. Like if you have that brand, then you must be good. But that doesn't guarantee anything. I don't think 97% of YC companies are successful. It's the other way around.
No, I totally agree with you. Yeah. So let's change it up a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
What's your thought about Elon Musk with Twitter? What do you think about that? What's your opinion?
I don't really have an opinion there. I think, like I said, when you're a public company, you got this pressure from shareholders to always deliver results financially. And going kind of private, you can do things that are more long-term and beneficial for the company than always thinking about your earnings in the next quarter. So I think in that is a good thing. Elon's an interesting guy, I would say. I don't know what plans he has for Twitter, but I'm going to bet that it's going to be better than what it is now.
I would agree too, man. Leveraging some type of Bitcoin technology or some sense. I think, I don't know, who knows? NFTs, maybe you have NFTs all through the thread. Who knows what's going to go on?
Yes.
But I think it's good to have him there because he's about freedom of speech. And I think freedom of speech is good because at some points, it's just really finding that hard balance is really where it's tricky.
Correct. Yes. I mean, who decides what's okay, what's not? That's a hard question.
Facebook.
Yes. Yeah.
Joke, right? Joke. I love Facebook. Facebook's an amazing company. I learned a lot of amazing things at that company. I think there's so many lessons that you can learn working at big, tech companies in Silicon Valley or outside of Silicon Valley or anywhere around the world. There's pros and cons to everything, right? Nothing is perfect. And I kind of want to always put that out there. Nothing is perfect. You always got to try your best and, aim for that. But I like to do is sometimes, highlight some of the flags.
Yeah.
To make the world a better place. you know?
Yeah,
There we go.
it's a good mission, man.
Yeah, it's a good mission. But your mission is to, change the whole transportation, kind of a, world or make it better, right?
Yeah, try to make it better.
Yeah, awesome. So where can people, who want to reach out to you and find out more and maybe support your cause, how could they do so? Or like, where can they find you, connect with you?
Yeah, I'm not on many social media platforms. I try to stay away from social media. But our website is enroute.ai. So it's enroute.ai. And you can email me at neil@enroute.ai.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool, man. Well, Neil, it's been great having you on the podcast. You're a personal friend of mine. I think you're an inspirational person. And, and I know we've had plenty of conversations, but I think like the beauty of, watching somebody build a startup or anybody, and especially a friend, is just like watching them grow, and learn through trials and tribulations and become a better person each time. And I think as long as you can reflect on your mistakes and your wins, I think you just become a better person as you grow through life. And I think as long as you're pushing to help humanity in some way, you'll definitely be blessed as a person consistently throughout life. So thank you, man, for coming on the show. That's it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Whoa.